Egypt, July 23, 1952. King Farouk is gambling in his Alexandria palace. At 1:30 a.m., 90 army officers seize control of Cairo without firing a single shot. By dawn, 150 years of monarchy are over. Egypt was nominally independent, but effectively controlled by Britain. The Suez Canal carried 70% of Europe's oil. King Farouk owned 200 cars, weighed 300 pounds, married a 16-year-old when he was 24. Meanwhile, 80% of Egyptians were illiterate and living in poverty. The Free Officers movement, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, had been planning for 2 years. The operation was surgical. Officers seized radio stations, military headquarters, and government buildings simultaneously. By 7 a.m., they broadcast their first communique. Farouk abdicated 3 days later and sailed to Italy with 204 suitcases. No casualties, no resistance. What few people know, Nasser wasn't even the official leader initially. But within 2 years, he took full control and nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, triggering international conflict with Britain, France, and Israel. The contrast, a bloodless transition that later contributed to regional instability. Nasser's pan-Arab vision inspired 17 military takeovers across the Middle East and Africa in the next decade. Egypt proves that the cleanest transitions can create complex consequences. But if Egypt's operation was surgical precision, our next was accidental success. Soviet Union, August 19, 1991. Mikhail Gorbachev is on vacation in Crimea. 8 communist hardliners declare him unable to perform his duties. Tanks roll into Moscow, and the attempt collapses in 72 hours, stopped by one man standing on a tank. The conspirators were the Soviet elite, KGB chief, defense minister, prime minister. They controlled 50,000 troops, 350 tanks, 300 armored vehicles. They placed Gorbachev under house arrest and announced on state TV they were taking control. Moscow woke up to martial law, but they made a fatal miscalculation about Boris Yeltsin. He climbed atop a T-72 tank outside the parliament building and declared the action illegal. Crowds surrounded the tanks. Soldiers refused to follow orders. CNN broadcast everything live, the first televised failed takeover in history. Within 3 days, the conspirators surrendered. What few people know, the failed attempt accelerated exactly what it tried to prevent. Within 4 months, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. 15 republics became independent. But Yeltsin, the defender of democracy, would later use force against parliament in 1993 and handpick Vladimir Putin as successor in 1999. Russia proves that failed attempts can be more consequential than successful ones, but if Russia's attempt failed through hesitation, our next succeeded through popular celebration. Portugal, April 25, 1974. At 12:20 a.m., a radio station plays Grandola Vila Morena, a banned folk song. It's the signal. By dawn, tanks occupy Lisbon, and instead of resisting them, citizens place red, carnations in their gun barrels. Portugal had been under authoritarian rule for 48 years, the longest in Western Europe. The regime ruled through strict controls and colonial conflicts in Africa that consumed 40% of the national budget. By 1974, Portugal was engaged in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau simultaneously. Young officers were serving in conflicts most Portuguese didn't support. The Carnation Revolution was organized by the Armed Forces Movement, mostly captains and majors tired of prolonged conflicts. They coordinated with 2 radio signals. Troops moved to predetermined positions. Prime Minister Caetano surrendered after 13 hours, 4 casualties, 3 from security forces. What few people know, Portugal almost became communist. For 18 months after the transition, radical officers nationalized 244 companies and seized farmland. External powers spent millions funding moderate parties. By 1976, democracy stabilized. The contrast, the only transition in modern history where flower power imagery is accurate, no purges, no mass arrests, just soldiers refusing to continue. Portugal proves that transitions don't need violence, just coordination and popular support. But if Portugal's transition was peaceful, our next involved external manipulation. Iran, August 19, 1953. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh is removed by crowds paid with foreign cash. The Shah returns from exile, and 26 years later, Iran becomes an Islamic theocracy directly because of this intervention. Mossadegh was Times Man of the Year in 1951. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Britain received 93% of profits, while Iran received 7%. Mossadegh demanded equal terms. Britain refused and orchestrated an embargo. Iran's economy struggled. Instead of helping, Western powers saw a potential threat. Operation Ajax was designed by intelligence operatives with a budget of money for influence operations. The plan: fund opposition media, pay religious leaders to criticize Mossadegh, hire groups to create unrest. First attempt failed. The Shah left for Rome, but operatives continued. Paid crowds stormed government buildings. Mossadegh surrendered after 9 hours. What few people know, Western powers later acknowledged the operation, but this intervention destroyed Iranian democracy. The Shah ruled with authoritarian methods for 25 years. When he fell in 1979, the Islamic Revolution weaponized anti-Western sentiment rooted in 1953, the hostage crisis. Today's tensions, all traceable to this historical intervention. Iran proves that successful interventions can fail spectacularly in the long run, but if Iran's intervention backfired after 26 years, our next involved digital age failure. Turkey, July 15, 2016. At 10 p.m., tanks block the Bosphorus Bridge in Istanbul. Fighter jets fly low over Ankara. Soldiers storm the state TV station. And President Erdogan stops the attempt using one unexpected tool: FaceTime. The plotters were mid-level officers with 35 F-16s, 74 tanks, 3,000 soldiers. Their plan: seize key installations, capture Erdogan, announce military takeover. But most of the military wasn't involved and didn't even know about it. Erdogan was on vacation when soldiers arrived at his hotel 15 minutes after he left. He couldn't access traditional media. Plotters controlled them. So he did something unprecedented. He used FaceTime to appear on CNN Turk via an iPhone held up to a camera. He appeared on live TV and called citizens to take to the streets. Millions responded. People surrounded military vehicles. Soldiers hesitated. What few people know, the attempt failed in 8 hours, but Erdogan used it to arrest 77,000 people in 3 months. He removed 150,000 from government jobs, closed 1,500 NGOs and 170 media outlets. The contrast is notable. The failed attempt strengthened Erdogan more than success would have helped the plotters. Many observers remain skeptical. Over 200 people lost their lives that night. Turkey proves that in the smartphone era, takeover attempts need digital strategy, not just military force. But if Turkey's attempt failed digitally, our next succeeded with external backing. Chile, September 11, 1973. Salvador Allende becomes the first democratically elected Marxist president in history. 3 years later, fighter jets attack his own presidential palace while he's inside, and foreign intelligence had been planning it for 1,095 days. Allende won with 36% of votes in 1970. His program: nationalize copper mines, redistribute land, establish relations with Cuba. Within months, copper production dropped 20%, inflation hit 140%, and food shortages affected Santiago. The Chilean elite reacted. Washington reacted more strongly. External powers authorized $10 million for destabilization operations. They funded opposition media, financed strikes that paralyzed the country for 26 days, and established contact with General Augusto Pinochet. On September 11th, military forces surrounded La Moneda Palace. Allende refused to surrender. He gave his final radio address at 9:10 a.m. What few people know, Pinochet's junta detained and mistreated thousands in the first 3 months alone. Over 40,000 faced harsh treatment in detention centers. But while implementing authoritarian control, Pinochet implemented free market reforms designed by University of Chicago economists. Chile became the economic experiment. GDP grew 6% annually, but 17 years of authoritarian rule came at the cost of a generation's freedom. Chile proves that democracy can be dismantled in a single morning with external support, but if Chile's takeover was backed by superpowers, our next enabled long-term control. Libya, September 1st, 1969. King Idris is in Turkey for medical treatment. At 2:30 a.m., a 27-year-old captain occupies the Tripoli radio station with 70 soldiers. By sunrise, the monarchy is over, and the captain rules for 42 years, becoming one of history's most eccentric leaders. Libya was poor despite discovering oil in 1959. King Idris was 79, unwell, and essentially dependent on foreign powers. Oil revenue disappeared into accounts abroad. Literacy rate, 25%. Life expectancy, 51 years. Young army officers, inspired by Nasser's Egypt, saw need for change. Muammar Gaddafi organized the operation with absolute secrecy. Only 12 officers knew the full plan. They faced zero resistance. Gaddafi announced the change at 6:30 a.m., his voice trembling. Within weeks, he closed foreign military bases, expelled 20,000 Italian residents, nationalized oil, and declared direct democracy. What few people know, Gaddafi genuinely improved Libya initially. By 1980, literacy hit 90%, life expectancy rose to 74 years. He built the great man-made river, but he became progressively unstable. When he fell in 2011, opposition forces found him in hiding and his removal was violent. Libya proves that initial improvements don't guarantee stable governance, but if Gaddafi built then fell, our next installed strict control immediately. Argentina, March 24, 1976. President Isabel Perón is arrested at 3:10 a.m. By breakfast, a military junta controls the country, and over the next 7 years, 30,000 people disappear, taken from homes, never seen again. Argentina was in crisis, inflation at 600% annually. Political violence affected 2,500 people in 1975 alone. Left-wing groups conducted urban operations against right-wing forces. Isabel Perón inherited power when her husband passed in 1974 but faced significant challenges. The military observed, planned, and waited. The takeover was inevitable and bloodless initially. Jorge Rafael Videla took power and declared process of national reorganization. The junta created 340 secret detention centers. Certain vehicles became associated with security forces. Pregnant women detained until giving birth, then removed, their babies given to military families. An estimated 500 babies taken this way. What few people know, the junta had explicit U.S. support. Officials told Videla, "Look, our basic attitude is that we would like you to succeed." The Argentine military trained at U.S. facilities, but this regime focused on Western values while committing severe human rights violations. The junta fell in 1983 after losing the Falklands conflict to Britain. Argentina proves that ideology means nothing when power is the goal, but if Argentina claimed to save civilization, our next enabled massive casualties. Indonesia, September 30th, 1965. 6 generals are taken from their homes at night. The army blames the Communist Party, and in the next 6 months, between 500,000 and 1 million people lose their lives, one of the 20th century's worst mass casualties that almost nobody discusses. Indonesia had the 3rd largest communist party in the world, 3 million members. General Suharto was a quiet officer nobody paid attention to, until 6 generals were removed and he declared the incident a communist takeover attempt, which historians still debate whether it actually was. What happened next was systematic targeting. The army distributed lists of suspected communists to civilian groups. Religious organizations joined. Villages were surrounded at night. Families were taken from homes. Rivers filled with remains. The U.S. Embassy in Jakarta provided 5,000 names of suspected communists to the Indonesian army. Washington called the events a positive development. What few people know, Suharto never officially called it a takeover. He claimed to be restoring order, but he systematically dismantled Sukarno's government and ruled for 32 years. Indonesia became a U.S. Cold War ally. Foreign investment arrived. But the contrast is chilling. While presenting as anti-communist action, it targeted ethnic groups. Many victims were ethnic Chinese with no political affiliation. And the world stayed silent because Suharto aligned with Western interests. Indonesia proves that the most severe events happen when international attention is elsewhere. But if Indonesia was hidden, our final case is ongoing. Myanmar, February 1, 2021. At 4 a.m., the military arrests Aung San Suu Kyi and every elected official they can find. They cut internet access for 8 million people. And 3 years later, Myanmar is still in internal conflict with 40,000 casualties and counting. Myanmar had just completed a democratic election in November 2020. Suu Kyi's party won 396 out of 476 seats, an overwhelming mandate. The military-backed party won 33 seats. The generals claimed irregularities without evidence. When parliament was set to convene, General Min Aung Hlaing deployed troops overnight. By dawn, democracy was ended, but Myanmar didn't accept it. The civil disobedience movement began immediately. Demonstrations filled cities. The military responded with force. In early March, security forces used live ammunition against protesters. Bodies left in streets as warnings, but protesters didn't stop. They organized resistance. Ethnic armed groups joined. Internal conflict erupted. What few people know, Myanmar's situation remains unresolved. The military controls cities but can't defeat resistance. Over 2 million people displaced. Economy contracted 18%. International assets frozen. The contrast is significant. Suu Kyi, Nobel Peace Prize winner who spent 15 years under house arrest fighting for democracy, is now detained again at age 78, given lengthy sentence on contested charges. The general who arrested her faces international isolation but maintains control through force. Myanmar proves that modern takeovers can't guarantee stability, only ongoing conflict. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and comment below.